For 13 days in October 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union stood exactly one miscalculation away from the end of human civilization. The two superpowers had spent 17 years building up nuclear arsenals under a doctrine called mutually assured destruction. The logic was simple. If either side launched a single attack, the other side would automatically launch back, guaranteeing total global annihilation. The immediate trigger for the crisis occurred 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Following a disastrous American-backed attempt to overthrow him at the Bay of Pigs, Cuban leader Fidel Castro turned to the Soviet Union for protection. He invited them to place nuclear missiles right on his island. This aerial photograph, captured on October 14th by an American U-2 plane, provided the definitive proof that the balance of the Cold War had shifted. Staring back at the intelligence community was clear visual evidence of Soviet missile sites under active construction on Cuban soil. Soviet missiles 90 miles away meant that Washington, D.C. and most major American cities were now 13 minutes from impact. There was no time for a diplomatic response. President John F. Kennedy gathered a secret group of advisors known as ExComm. Almost immediately, the military generals pushed for a fast, clean airstrike to destroy the sites before they became operational. Kennedy listened and then asked the most crucial question in the room. What happens next? After America bombs Cuba, where do the Soviets respond? And where does the escalation end? To avoid an immediate slide into nuclear war, Kennedy chose a different path. On October 22nd, he went on national television and announced a naval quarantine of Cuba, blocking Soviet ships from delivering more weapons. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, Soviet ships loaded with equipment sailed directly toward the waiting American Navy. If they tried to run the blockade, the U.S. would open fire. On October 24th, the Soviet ships reached the line. Then they stopped and turned around. Secretary Rusk noted quietly that they were eyeball to eyeball, and the other fellow just blinked. While the public followed the televised drama of the blockade, the presidents in Washington and Moscow were starting to lose their grip on the military hardware they had deployed. By October 27th, the crisis moved out of the committee rooms and into the field, where military hardware moved much faster than diplomacy. Over Cuba, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down, killing the pilot. Kennedy's generals demanded immediate retaliation according to protocol. Kennedy had to actively refuse the order. On that exact same day, another American U-2 accidentally drifted off course into Soviet airspace over Alaska. Soviet fighter jets scrambled to shoot it down. American jets scrambled to protect it. While men in suits carefully debated policy back in Washington, a single pilot reacting to a shadow in the Arctic sky could have accidentally triggered World War III. Near the blockade line, the Soviet submarine B-59 navigated the depths of the Atlantic, carrying a classified payload. B-59 had completely lost radio contact with Moscow. The crew had no idea what was happening on the surface, or if negotiations were even taking place. They were operating completely blind. Above them, American Navy ships detected the submarine and began dropping small depth charges. These were intended strictly as signaling devices to force the submarine to surface, but the crew of B-59 didn't know that. Hearing the explosions rocking the hull, the submarine's captain concluded that the war had already started. He ordered his men to prepare a nuclear torpedo. Soviet protocol required a failsafe. To launch a nuclear weapon, the 3 senior officers on board the vessel had to unanimously agree to fire. The survival of the American naval fleet and human civilization as we know it was distilled down to a vote among 3 exhausted men trapped in a metal tube. The captain and the political officer both voted to launch, but the third officer, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, said no. One man cast the deciding vote against the torpedo. While Arkhipov was holding the line in the dark, a separate resolution was quietly taking shape in Washington. President Kennedy sent his brother, Robert Kennedy, to open a secret back-channel dialogue. Meeting secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin, they hammered out a compromise. America publicly pledged not to invade Cuba and secretly agreed to pull its own nuclear missiles out of Turkey. The Soviets, in return, would leave Cuba. This reconnaissance image, taken after the crisis, shows the abandoned launch positions and empty tent foundations following Nikita Khrushchev's announcement that the Soviets were dismantling the sites. 13 months later, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. He died without ever knowing how close his administration actually came to the brink. The details of the B-59 submarine and Vasily Arkhipov's deciding vote remained classified for decades. The world survived 1962 through a sequence of accidents, turned-around ships, and a single officer who refused to fire a torpedo in the dark. In the end, the safety of human civilization rested on blind luck.